the base YouTube. All right, so is the Peace Corps worth it? Is doing the Peace Corps worth it? Yes, 100%. I can say, in my case, absolutely. It is absolutely worth it to do the Peace Corps. If you have thought about it for a long time, if living in another country and learning about that country's culture is something that is interesting to you, I strongly suggest doing it, okay? But let's talk about, before we get to the reasons why Peace Corps is worth it, let's go ahead and take a step back. Let's talk about some of the challenges or the things that volunteers or potential volunteers might find difficult about joining the Peace Corps. So one of the main challenges that I think a lot of volunteers think about is being away from family and loved ones and friends. When you do the Peace Corps, you're going to leave everyone behind for 2 to 3 years. And one of the keys to figuring out whether or not you want to do Peace Corps is, I think, going back and forth with yourself and with those close to you is, what does that look like? And is that something that I can deal with, is being away from these people? Because even though I've had plenty of friends that have had family members and friends come to visit them while they were in the Peace Corps, you have to assume that nobody is going to come to visit you. You really have to assume that, because that is the case for a lot of volunteers where nobody comes to visit you. So you're going to be away from these people for 2 to 3 years. And so that is a challenge that is worth thinking about, obviously, before joining Peace Corps. All right. Another thing is the pay. This is technically volunteer work, and if you are a volunteer that spent a lot of money at a private school to get a lot of student loans to get a fancy degree, it's hard sometimes when you've been living off ramen for 4 years to decide, well, I want to live an even more Spartan lifestyle that I've been using. Because when you join the Peace Corps, more likely than not, it will be more Spartan than what you are used to. It is a very long application process from the time you apply for the Peace Corps until the time that you actually ship off to your destination. It is a very long process. It's going to be about a year, give or take, more than a year in a lot of cases. And that's enough to dissuade a lot of people who are thinking about joining Peace Corps. You know, we live in a society that really wants instant gratification, and if you go through a week, one of the reasons why the Peace Corps process is good at finding people that will go over and serve for 2 years consecutively is because they make volunteers commit to a year, really, of going through the process before they start their service. So I've always felt like this is a good way for the Peace Corps to weed out those volunteers that are really serious about the service. And this is a long process. You apply, you write essays, you interview, you get references, you go through a background check, you go through an extensive dental check, an extensive medical check, you get fingerprinted. You have you get a number of immunizations before heading out. There are a lot of things that happen over the course of that year. It is a year-long process to join the Peace Corps, and it is a good way to find out which potential volunteers are really serious about making that 2-year commitment overseas. Health, okay. I think some volunteers are worried about health because they're going to areas that have issues with things like malaria and yellow fever sometimes. All right. And what I would say for health is that Peace Corps will do whatever it can to keep you safe. The last thing that they want is a volunteer to have a negative health reaction while overseas, which is why they were so early on pulling the plug around the world on its operations once COVID-19 started to spread. Okay, the last thing that they want is an American volunteer becoming gravely ill or injured overseas. And I think on this case, this is something about that a lot of volunteers worry about before joining the Peace Corps, but when you get there, you realize this organization is really designed in so many ways to keep you safe. which leads me to another point that might be concerning to volunteers, and to me, it's a hand-holding of the organization. All right, this was something that was frustrating to a lot of volunteers that had previous travel experience, is that they got to a country that they were excited to explore and have a little bit of independence in, but the Peace Corps came and said, well, there are areas you guys aren't going to be able to travel to. If you want to travel, you have to let us know in advance. We have to approve it. All right, so there was a lot of organizational oversight that I think can dissuade people that are used to traveling, because now you're going to deal with a lot of oversight from this organization that some volunteers feel like is keeping constant tabs on you. It never bothered me that much, but I know that a lot of volunteers that had a lot of travel experience going into the Peace Corps, this is something that bothered them, and I think this is something that would be a challenge to them in going into the Peace Corps. So what makes it worth it? What makes joining the Peace Corps worth it? Well, to start, you're going to do in your full 2-year service, you are going to do a couple of projects in your service that you will be so excited about, that will make you feel so good, that will make your counterparts that you're working with feel so good, and it will really bring your community closer together. And those were some of the highlights of my life as an adult, really. When I think about the projects that were successful and that the community was really happy with, you feel so good to knock those out, and you just want to call everyone around you and tell them about what a great experience it was, and you want to thank everyone that helped you run these projects and that contributed to the projects. So those highs that you get from work are I haven't experienced anything like those in other jobs that I've had outside of Peace Corps. You're going to make lifelong friends in Peace Corps. I'm talking about the Americans that you come over there with, that are in your group, that are volunteering with you. I'm especially talking about the people in your community that live in rural areas. They are friends for life. If they need anything, you're going to want to be there for them, and if you need anything, they're going to be there for you. I can't tell you the number of people that I was good friends with from years ago, that once we got back in contact with each other, we picked things up as if I had never left, you know. These are lifelong friends that you're going to be making, and these relationships that you form in Peace Corps, to me, were one of the major highlights of serving for the Peace Corps. All right. So you're going to learn a new language in the Peace Corps, probably, unless you know Spanish or French and they send you to a Spanish or French-speaking country. You probably are going to learn a new language, which to me was one of the most enjoyable aspects of the service. Now, even if you feel like you're not naturally good at languages because you've taken Spanish or French in high school, or you've taken classes at a community college, all right, it doesn't mean you're not a good language learner, because when you go to the Peace Corps, you're going to be immersed in that language. You will learn that language. If you are immersed in it, it helps you so much. Learning the language becomes so much easier. And I struggle to believe I can't believe how people learn languages when they're not immersed in the culture. But that's one of the beautiful things about Peace Corps, is you are going to learn a language because you're going to have to use it in your everyday life. For everything, you're going to need to learn how to communicate it in that language that you're learning. Probably. It's the case for a lot of volunteers anyways. Okay, after you finish the Peace Corps, you're going to want to go find a job, I'm assuming. And when you go through the interview process, they're going to ask you questions like, what's some of the bigger challenges that you've had to deal with at work? And what do you count as being one of your biggest successes? And you're going to have so many stories in Peace Corps to choose from when it comes to those two questions. You are going to be able to walk into an interview and sit there confidently knowing that you have something interesting and worthwhile to talk about with the person sitting across from you. That's another valuable thing that you gain from doing the Peace Corps. You get to learn about another culture. All right. If you've taken an anthropology class and you found it fascinating to learn about other different cultures around the world, you are going to love doing Peace Corps, because especially if you've learned that language, if you've really done a good job of practicing your language and being outgoing, you are going to learn so much. And I was amazed. I served in the smallest country in mainland Africa, the Gambia, and in that small country, I was astonished with the diversity and the variety of cultures and the variety of lifestyles that you find in the Gambia. And I spent 3 years there, and I didn't even tap into, that phrase, the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. That became very apparent during my time in Peace Corps. And a part of me thinks it would be so interesting to just spend the rest of my life living there and learning about the culture and learning from the cultures there. Government jobs is a big bonus, I think, for a lot of people thinking about being a Peace Corps volunteer. Because I've known a lot of friends that went straight from the Peace Corps to get a job with a department in the government. Even if you're not planning on using the non-competitive eligibility, I've just found that Peace Corps volunteers in general tend to have an easier way, tend to find it easier, I think, to get government jobs. So if you wanted to work in the government, the Peace Corps is a great stepping stone to reach that goal. You get to read so many classic books in your time in your Peace Corps. You're never going to have more time to read. I got to read so many classics that I had wanted to read for years, and I'm so happy that I had the opportunity to do that. I've never read that much. I've never had time to read that much before doing Peace Corps, and I've never had time to read that much since the Peace Corps. You're going to have so much time to read all those books that you've wanted to read over the years. And it ties into the government job thing, but there are a lot of, I think, NGO opportunities and other international working opportunities after you do the Peace Corps. I never would have gotten this international teaching job if I wouldn't have even have thought of looking for an international teaching job if it hadn't been for the Peace Corps. The Peace Corps really, for me, made me realize that I loved living in West Africa. I love the culture here. I love the people here. And I want to spend, if not the rest of my life here, a very large portion of my life living over here in West Africa. And Peace Corps gave me that opportunity to do that.